My name is Avery Collins, and the day my family left me in the middle of the Arizona desert was supposed to be a celebration. I had just earned my master's in architecture. 2 years of late nights, internships, ramen dinners, and fighting tooth and nail for respect in a male-dominated program had finally paid off. I was lining up interviews with firms in Portland and Seattle, my dream cities. I was hopeful, energized, ready to step into the life I had built for myself. So when my parents invited me on a family getaway to Red Rock Canyon, saying they wanted to reconnect and celebrate all I had achieved, I hesitated, but said yes. I mean, what kind of daughter says no to a peaceful trip with her parents and brother after graduation? I should have said no. Looking back, there were signs. The overly enthusiastic text from Mom, "This trip is going to be so healing." And the fact that my older brother Ethan, who barely texted me happy birthday, suddenly wanted to go too. There was tension, unspoken resentment lingering from years of family politics. My dad, a construction tycoon who ran Collins and Sons Developments, had made it clear since I was a teenager that designing buildings was a man's job. And Ethan, he was the golden boy, flunked out of college twice, but still the next in line to run the family company. No questions asked. Me? I was the creative one, the emotional girl, the dreamer who needed to grow up. But I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they did want to make things right. Maybe they were proud of me. Maybe they had changed. On the morning of day 2, we were driving through a remote stretch of Arizona on our way to a hiking trail Ethan had picked out. It was empty, sun-scorched land in every direction. No signal, no signs of life. Just the hum of the SUV's tires over hot pavement and the occasional tumbleweed rolling across the road like something out of a cliché. "Hey, Avery," Ethan grinned from the front seat. "Can you grab some water from the trunk? I think we forgot to bring more up front." "Sure," I said. We pulled into a rest stop, not even a real one, just a dusty patch of gravel with a weathered wooden bench and an old trash can with bullet holes. I got out of the car, went to the back, and reached for the trunk. It didn't open. The car was locked. I turned around, and in that split second, the engine revved. My dad met my eyes through the driver's side window. My mom gave me a tight-lipped smile. Ethan held up his phone, recording. "Let's see if she can make it back on her own," he shouted, laughing. And then they drove away. Dust kicked up around me as their taillights disappeared into the shimmer of desert heat. I stood frozen, my mouth open, my hands shaking. I thought, it had to be a joke. They'd loop around, come back, say, "Just kidding," and laugh it off like every other time they'd taught me a lesson. But 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20, and the only thing that moved was the sun climbing higher, hotter, crueler. They hadn't just left me, they had abandoned me. And at that moment, under the unforgiving Arizona sky, one truth hit me harder than the heat ever could. They didn't expect me to come back. The heat was like a second betrayal, quiet, cruel, and relentless. At first I ran, not because I had a plan, not because I knew where I was going, but because my body moved faster than my mind could catch up. My sandals kicked up gravel as I sprinted after the disappearing SUV, screaming their names. "Dad! Mom! Ethan!" They didn't even slow down. By the time I stopped, my throat was dry and burning. My heart pounded, not just from exertion, but from a rising wave of panic so heavy I thought it might crush me. The silence of the desert was deafening. No wind, no birds, just the buzzing in my ears from the adrenaline crashing through me. I checked my pockets. Nothing. No phone. No wallet. They had insisted I pack light that morning, saying we'd come back to the cabin after the hike. I had trusted them. I sat down on the dusty bench, my legs giving out beneath me. Sweat poured down my back, soaking through my t-shirt. I felt like a child again. Only this time, there was no neighbor to call, no teacher to check on me, no safety net, just me. And miles of unforgiving desert. After what felt like hours, I spotted something in the distance. What looked like a small, battered road sign. I stood, brushed the dust off my shorts, and started walking. Every step felt heavier than the last. The sun climbed higher, and my mouth dried to cotton. I had no water, no hat, no idea how far I'd gone. I counted steps in my head, trying to keep calm. My dad used to say, Avery overthinks everything. That's her problem. Now I wished I could think more. Think fast. Think like someone who had a chance at surviving this. After what must have been 2 hours, the outline of a gas station shimmered ahead, like a mirage. But as I got closer, I realized it was real. A worn sign swung above the door. Miller's Stop and Fix. There were 2 old trucks parked outside, and a rust-colored ice machine that looked like it hadn't worked in years. I stumbled through the door. A bell jingled as I entered. The air conditioning, weak but present, was a blessing I didn't know I needed until it hit my face. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 50s, tan skin, white hair tied back in a loose bun. She looked up from a crossword puzzle and squinted at me. "You all right, honey?" That's when I burst into tears. I couldn't even speak at first, just sobbed like a child, my shoulders shaking. She rushed around the counter and guided me to a chair, handed me a bottle of water from the mini fridge. "Take your time," she said gently. "You're safe now." It took me 10 minutes to explain, piece by piece, what had happened. At first, she thought I was joking. Then when she saw the terror in my eyes, her face darkened. "They left you out there? On purpose?" I nodded. She introduced herself as Clara, and when I finished, she exhaled sharply. "Jesus, that's not a prank, that's abuse." That word sat heavy in my chest. Abuse. I had always brushed it off. Tough love, they'd called it. Character building. My brother used to say, "You're soft, Avery. We're just trying to make you stronger." But this wasn't strength. This was abandonment. "Where were y'all staying?" Clara asked. "Some Airbnb cabin about 30 minutes from here, I think. But I don't remember the name and my phone's gone. They took everything." "Sweetheart, you're not the first girl I've seen walk through that door scared and half sunburnt," she muttered. "But you might be the first whose family did that to her." She gave me some crackers, sat beside me, and said the words that would change the course of my life. "You don't have to go back to them." I stared at her. "But they're my family." "Blood don't mean kindness," she replied, eyes firm. "It doesn't even mean love. It just means shared DNA. You deserve better." That night, Clara called a friend in town who ran a small roadside diner and had a spare room above it. "Her name's June," she said. "She's got a soft spot for strays." Stray. That's what I was now. Not a daughter, not a sister, just a discarded piece of someone else's family photo. But maybe, just maybe, being thrown away wasn't the end. Maybe it was the start of something better. The room above the diner was small, barely big enough for a twin bed, a wobbly dresser, and a window that stuck halfway when you tried to open it. But to me, it felt like the Ritz-Carlton. June, the diner's owner, was a wiry woman in her 60s with a voice that sounded like too much black coffee and a lifetime of disappointment. She didn't smile much, but when she handed me the spare key that night, she said, "You work hard, you stay respectful, you'll be fine here." It was the kindest contract I'd ever signed. By 6 a.m. the next morning, I was in the back kitchen, hair tied up, apron on, learning how to flip pancakes without burning the edges. The breakfast shift at Pine Hill Diner was fast, chaotic, and loud. Coffee never stopped brewing, orders piled up, and regulars barked for the usual without ever saying what that was. But I learned, quickly. Maybe it was survival instinct, maybe it was the thrill of doing something, anything, that wasn't defined by my father's shadow, or my brother's entitlement. That afternoon, as I wiped down the last table, June handed me a crumpled envelope with my name on it. Inside was $68 in tips and a short note. "Not bad for day one. You've got grit." I stared at it for a long time. No one in my family had ever praised me for grit. They'd only ever told me what I lacked. That evening, after my shift, I sat by the diner window, sipping weak lemonade and watching the sun bleed orange over the mountains. For the first time in days, my hands weren't trembling. I still didn't know what my next step was. I didn't have my resume, my portfolio, my laptop, my degree certificate. All of it was back in Seattle, or possibly thrown in the trash if my parents had followed through with their last threat. Don't come crawling back when things fall apart. We won't be here. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It clears the ground for something new. That night, I finally borrowed June's landline to call someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Professor Lang, my thesis advisor. He picked up on the second ring. Avery? I almost cried hearing someone say my name without scorn or sarcasm. I need help, I said, and I told him everything. Not the whole ugly saga, not yet, but enough for him to understand that I wasn't going back home anytime soon. Do you have internet access? He asked after a pause. I can use the diner's old desktop. It's a dinosaur, but it works. Good. I'll email you your final project files, portfolio, references, even your resume. I saved backups. I always do. I knew you might need it one day. Why would you think that? Because, he said gently, you always walked like someone who'd have to fight twice as hard to be heard. The next morning before my shift, I sat at the creaky diner computer and opened an inbox full of life rafts, PDFs, letters of recommendation, job board links. Hope, zipped and attached. I also had a new email from Clara. Subject line, Pine Hill Library needs help. She explained that the local library had been trying to apply for a renovation grant, but couldn't submit the required design proposals. Their part-time clerk had quit, and the town couldn't afford an architecture firm. Think you're up for the challenge? She wrote. We don't have money, but we've got purpose. I stared at the screen. I hadn't opened KD software since graduation, but my fingers itched just thinking about it. That week, after every shift at the diner, I biked over to the library with June's rusty old Schwinn. The librarian, Mr. Teller, who looked like he'd been printed from a typewriter manual in 1972, welcomed me in with a nod and a dusty blueprint. This place is falling apart, he said, tapping the warped floorboards. But we've got a shot at that state grant, if we can make the application deadline. I spread the blueprint over the reading room table and rolled up my sleeves. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just surviving, I was designing. I still didn't have a phone, or a family that cared if I was dead or alive. But I had people. Clara, June, Mr. Teller, even the cranky trucker who tipped me $3 and said, "You've got fire in you, girl. Don't let anyone stomp it out." They didn't know my past. And for once, I didn't want to explain it. I wanted to build something forward. I didn't tell anyone at the library that I'd once been offered a junior position at one of Seattle's top green architecture firms. Didn't mention the scholarship I'd won, the 80-page thesis I defended in front of a panel who all wore expensive glasses and said things like, "Avery, your line work is emotionally intelligent." In Pine Hill, I was just the girl who served coffee and eggs in the morning and who stayed late at the library poring over faded blueprints with a mechanical pencil tucked behind her ear. And that anonymity was a gift. Teller gave me full freedom to reimagine the children's wing. It floods every time it rains anyway, he shrugged, and I poured myself into the project. No rules, no clients breathing down my neck, no father telling me, "Keep it simple, you're not designing a museum." For once, my only voice to listen to was my own. I sketched out a sunlit reading area with wide windows and modular shelves shaped like tree trunks. I proposed a rainwater runoff system and low-cost insulation panels. By the time I presented the draft to the town council 2 weeks later, I had drawings pinned to the wall, a 10-minute pitch rehearsed in front of a cracked bathroom mirror, and shaky hands that stilled the moment I started speaking. They approved the application on the spot. Not because they were wowed by the technical jargon, some of them didn't even understand half of it, but because I believed in it. And they saw that. By the end of the month, something strange started happening. People started coming to me, not for coffee refills, but for advice. "Hey, Avery," said Jonah, the guy who ran the antique shop. "Think you could help me figure out how to rearrange my front display? Make it look more, I don't know, less like a flea market and more like an actual store?" "Sure," I replied, surprised. "Let's take a look." Then it was the town bakery, the veterinarian's office, a lady who wanted to remodel her guest house to rent it out. I wasn't getting paid yet, but I was getting something even more valuable: trust. And with it, my identity started to shift. I wasn't the girl who got left behind anymore. I was the designer, the fixer, the girl with a pencil in her bun and sawdust on her sneakers. One night, as I was closing up the library, Clara walked in holding a brown paper bag. "Dinner," she said, setting it on my table without ceremony. "You've been skipping meals again." "I've been busy," I mumbled, flipping through a sketchbook. "I know," she said, settling into a chair across from me. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "Me, 40 years ago." She paused. "The difference is, no one gave me a way out. I had to burn my bridges with gasoline and grit my teeth for a decade before I started over." I looked at her, eyes wide. "But you did start over." She nodded slowly. "And so are you, whether you see it yet or not." Later that week, a man walked into the library asking for me. Mid-30s, plaid shirt, laptop bag. His name was Daniel Rivers, and he worked remotely as a web developer from the next town over. "I heard you helped Pine Hill submit their grant proposal," he said, extending a hand. "I do freelance work for nonprofits. A few of my clients could really use someone with your eye for design, especially for community centers and adaptive reuse projects." I blinked. "I don't have a company, or a website, or even a business card." He smiled. "That's okay. I think you're building something better, a reputation." That weekend, Daniel and I sat for hours at the diner booth, laptops open between stacks of blueberry pancakes and syrup-stained napkins. He explained how he'd been struggling to find designers who could translate ideas into spaces that feel human. "You're not just technical," he said. "You feel the spaces you build. That's rare." His words hit somewhere deep in my chest, somewhere that had been hollowed out by years of being dismissed. My father used to say, "Feelings don't build foundations, bricks do." But maybe they weren't so separate. Maybe feeling was the strongest foundation I had. And so, by the end of my second month in Pine Hill, I did something terrifying. I opened a new folder on Daniel's laptop, titled it Collins Studio Draft 1, not Collins and Sons, not the company you were supposed to inherit. Just me, Avery Collins, a name they tried to erase from their future. But now, a name I was finally writing into my own. 3 months after being left behind in the desert, I sent my first invoice. It was for $240. Not much, but enough to make my hands tremble when I hit send. Enough to cover groceries for 2 weeks. And maybe, just maybe, enough to make me believe I could really do this. Not just survive, build. The project was simple. Redesign the community center's interior for better wheelchair access and space optimization. But to me, it was sacred. My first paid job not tied to a corporate ladder, or my last name, or someone else's approval. It was mine. Daniel helped me set up a website. Basic, but clean. I used the diner's Wi-Fi during off hours, working from the counter between breakfast and lunch shifts. June started calling me Architect Girl, and every time I heard it, I straightened my back just a little more. By the end of that month, I had 4 paying clients. I moved out of the tiny room above the diner and into a small studio apartment above the hardware store. It had creaky floors, one window, and a leaky pipe in the bathroom. But it was mine. No one paid for it. No one threatened to take it away. That night, I bought myself a cheap desk lamp and a tiny succulent. I named it Grace. Not because I felt graceful, but because I was learning to give myself some. Then the phone rang, an unknown number from Washington State. At first, I ignored it, let it go to voicemail. But something in my chest, it wasn't curiosity, more like instinct, told me to check the message. "Avery, it's Ethan." My fingers went cold. "Look, Mom and Dad are asking about you. They said they haven't heard a word since the trip. We thought maybe you'd come home after a few days, but it's been months. They're concerned." I laughed out loud, bitter, hollow. Concerned? He sounded almost confused, like I was the one who ghosted them. As if they hadn't abandoned me in the desert like I was nothing. I replayed the message once, then deleted it. 2 hours later, an email arrived from my father's company address. Subject line, "We need to talk." I didn't open it. The next day, a flower delivery showed up at the diner, addressed to "Our strong girl, let's reconnect." From my mother. June scoffed when she saw the card. They've got nerves, don't they? They do, I muttered, tossing the lilies in the dumpster behind the building. That night, I wrote a message I never thought I'd send. To Ethan Collins. Subject, I am not coming back. You left me. You watched me scream in the middle of the desert, and you laughed. You all blocked my number and cut off my apartment lease. That wasn't a joke. That was cruelty. I'm safe now. I'm working. I'm building a life. I don't want to be contacted again. I'm not your burden. I'm not your punchline. I'm done. Avery. I didn't sign it love. I didn't ask how they were. I didn't soften it with a smiley face or a memory. Because I didn't owe them softness. Not anymore. The next morning, I got a call from Daniel. Hey, he said. I just sent your info to someone. Local nonprofit looking to build a youth arts center. They've got real funding. They're looking for someone who gets small towns, and your name keeps coming up. I stared at the sky, half expecting lightning. You serious? I whispered. Dead serious, he replied. You ready for this? I thought about the girl who stood crying under the Arizona sun 3 months ago. Forgotten, discarded, convinced her value depended on whether her family claimed her or not. And then I looked around. The drafting table, the chipped paint I planned to sand down myself, the growing folder of client files, and the tiny succulent by the window. I smiled. I was born ready. They just never wanted to see it. 3 weeks into the Youth Arts Center project, I stopped waking up in survival mode. The panic had faded. The constant tightness in my chest, the one that used to whisper, "What if they're right about you?" was gone, replaced by something steadier, stronger, purpose. The center was set to transform an old post office on Pine Hill's south side. The structure had good bones but terrible lighting and decades of neglect. I proposed knocking out the interior walls to open the space, using reclaimed wood, skylights, and modular dividers that could shift depending on each program. It was bold. It was risky. And the town council approved it unanimously. When I walked out of the meeting, people clapped, actual applause. For me. Daniel threw both arms in the air like we'd won the Super Bowl. You're a local celebrity now, he teased. I laughed, but it stuck in my throat, because part of me still didn't believe I could be wanted without first being torn apart. The next morning, a large white envelope arrived at my studio's mailbox. No return address. Inside, a printed photo of me and Daniel standing in front of the library last week, smiling, relaxed, completely unaware, and a sticky note. Glad to see you're making new friends. Let's catch up soon. E. My stomach flipped. Ethan. I hadn't told anyone where I lived. My address wasn't public. The website only listed a P.O. box. Somebody had gone out of their way to find me. I showed the note to Clara and Daniel that afternoon at the diner. He's here? Clara's brow furrowed. In Pine Hill? I don't know, I said quietly. But I think he's looking. Daniel leaned forward. We can talk to the sheriff. File a harassment report. No, not yet. Because deep down I wanted to believe this was just noise, a last-ditch attempt to rattle me, and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they still could. 2 days later, a call came through on the studio's office line. My intern answered and handed the phone to me with a confused look. Said, "It's your uncle?" I took the call with caution. Hello? Avery, thank God, a voice replied. It wasn't an uncle. It was my father. Every muscle in my body tensed. How did you get this number? I said. I have my ways. What do you want? We're coming to Pine Hill, Ethan and I. We thought maybe you'd be ready to talk. In person. You thought wrong. There was silence. Then the line crackled. We miss you, he said. Like that alone would erase everything. You left me in a desert and canceled my lease, I said coldly. You laughed while I begged for help. I didn't know it would go that far. Dad, I cut him off, my voice rising. It went exactly as far as you meant it to go. You didn't lose me by accident. You threw me away. You've built something impressive, he added, ignoring what I said. People are talking, clients, articles, even the mayor. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't remorse. It was interest. I wasn't their failure anymore. I was their asset again. "You're not coming here," I said flatly. "And if you show up, I'll file a restraining order." There was a pause, cold and calculating. "You wouldn't do that to your own father." "You're right," I said. "But I'd absolutely do it to a stranger who stalks me after years of abuse." And I hung up. That evening, I gathered Clara, Daniel, and June around my small dining table and told them everything about the call, the envelope, the visit they were planning. They didn't flinch. "We'll back you," Daniel said. "Whatever you need." "I know the sheriff's office. We'll make sure they're aware," Clara added. June just stood up, walked to my door, and locked it. Then she looked at me squarely and said, "They don't get to come here and undo what you've built." And for the first time since I was a child, I felt protected. Not because I belonged to someone, but because I mattered to people who chose me. The next day, I updated my website's contact page to say, "For professional inquiries only, personal contact will be reported." And at the bottom, I added a quote, "You don't owe anyone access to the life they tried to destroy." It wasn't just a warning, it was a boundary, and I finally had the power to hold it. 3 days after I updated my website, I got an email from someone named Allison Ray, an editor at Western Groundbreaking, a regional design and architecture magazine. The subject line read, "We'd love to feature your work and your story." At first, I thought it was a scam, but then I Googled her, real person, real publication, and somehow, they'd heard of me. Allison's email was short, direct, and unlike anything I'd expected in my inbox. "Your name has come up more than once during our research into emerging rural designers reshaping the West. We're profiling women in architecture who are building transformative spaces in overlooked communities, and your work on the Pine Hill Youth Arts Center caught our attention. Would you be open to an interview?" I stared at the screen for 10 full minutes. Then I read it again. Not Avery, daughter of William Collins. Not heir to Collins and Sons. Just Avery Collins, designer, builder, creator. I said yes, but I also set terms. The interview took place over Zoom in my apartment. Grace the succulent sitting proudly on the windowsill behind me. Allison asked about the art center, the library project, my design philosophy. She didn't press about my past, but I knew it was lingering in the edges of her questions. When she finally asked gently, "What brought you to Pine Hill?" I paused. I could have lied, said something vague about craving small-town life or wanting to make a difference. But instead, I answered truthfully, not the full story, but enough. I came here after walking away from something that didn't serve me anymore. I lost everything I thought defined me, and that's how I figured out who I really was. So, in a way, I added with a small smile, being left behind became the beginning. She nodded slowly, and that's all she needed. 2 months later, the magazine hit newsstands. I didn't know it had published until June walked into the diner holding a copy and grinning like she'd won the lottery. "Page 36, she said, slapping it on the counter. "They got your good side." There I was, smiling, standing in front of the community center project site in a hard hat and jeans, blueprint in hand. The headline read, "Reimagining the West: How One Young Architect Found Her Voice in a Forgotten Town." The article was warm, inspiring, and, most importantly, mine. No mention of the family scandal, no betrayal, just skill, resilience, and what I had built. For the first time in years, I saw my name in print and didn't flinch. And that's when the messages started. An email from Ethan, a letter forwarded through my studio's inbox from my mother, and then a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. But the voice? Undeniably his. "Avery, it's your father. I saw the article. You've done well. We didn't expect this. I just wanted to say, maybe it's time we talk." I played it once and then deleted it, because I didn't build all of this, my life, my work, my safety, just to hand it back to the people who thought they could shatter me without consequence. A week later, Daniel found me pacing outside the library. "You okay?" he asked. "I think they're going to show up," I said quietly. They can't stand that I did this without them. He nodded slowly. Do you want them to? I looked him straight in the eyes. No, but I think I'm ready if they do. He didn't say anything, just put a steadying hand on my shoulder. Sometimes, silence is the most sacred kind of agreement. Later that night, as I sat alone in my apartment, watching the sky fade from gold to indigo, I opened my laptop and pulled up the article again. Not out of vanity, but to remind myself, this is real. This is mine, and no one gets to rewrite it but me. I didn't need my family's applause. I had earned my own. It was a Thursday afternoon when they came. I had just wrapped up a meeting with the Arts Center board and was walking down Main Street with a folder full of revised blueprints in one hand and an iced tea in the other when I saw the black SUV, parked right in front of the Pine Hill Co-op, polished, out of place, too sleek for this dusty town. Then the door opened, and out stepped my mother, Barbara Collins, perfectly ironed blouse, oversized sunglasses, that same diamond bracelet she always wore, even when pretending to be casual. My stomach dropped. A second door opened. Ethan, of course. He looked older somehow, harsher, the same smug jawline, same watch he'd gotten from Dad on his 21st birthday. He spotted me instantly. Avery! My feet froze. Every part of me screamed, run! But I didn't. Not this time. Because this was my street, my town, my life. I waited. They approached slowly, as if unsure whether I'd bolt or explode. I hope this isn't a bad time, my mother said, voice calm and composed, as if we were old friends meeting unexpectedly at a grocery store. It's not a good time either, I replied evenly. Ethan scratched the back of his neck. We were passing through. Thought maybe we could talk. I laughed once, sharp, bitter. You were passing through a town 7 hours from your home? That's convenient. Barbara shifted. We saw the article, Avery. We were proud. Genuinely. Funny, I said, because when I needed you to be proud, when I needed anything, you vanished. She sighed. We know, we made mistakes. Mistakes? I repeated, voice tightening. You left me in the middle of the desert like trash. You cut me off, blocked my phone, shut down my lease. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. People on the sidewalk started slowing down. Pine Hill wasn't the kind of town where drama happened in public, and I was very aware of the eyes watching from across the street. But I didn't care. Because this wasn't shame. This was truth. We thought you'd come back, Ethan said softly. I turned to him. You thought I'd crawl back, that I'd be desperate enough to forgive anything. You were always too sensitive, he muttered. Reflex, maybe. Instinct. And just like that, the rage returned. I stepped closer, so close I could see the way his expression flinched. You don't get to say that anymore. You don't get to define me. Barbara raised a hand. Avery, please. Your father's not well. He wanted us to see you, to try, before it's too late. I'm not interested in last-minute redemption arcs, I said. You don't get to check a box labeled forgiven just because time ran out. Silence. Just the buzz of the town around us, a truck idling nearby, a dog barking faintly in the distance. Then Barbara said something I didn't expect. I'm sorry. 2 words. Quiet. Real. I can't fix what we did, she continued, but I can tell you it haunts me, and I wanted to see if there was even a sliver of a chance to make it right. I searched her face for the old tactics, the guilt trips, the manipulation, but I didn't see them. I saw a woman who had lost her daughter and was just beginning to realize what that meant. I don't know what you expect from me, I said honestly. Nothing, she replied. Just this. Just standing here, just letting you be seen. I swallowed hard. Ethan looked away. We'll be gone tomorrow, she added. Just if you ever want to talk. My number hasn't changed. I know, I said. And then I turned and walked away. I didn't cry. Not right then. I walked to the diner, sat at the counter, and stared at my reflection in the napkin holder until June placed a glass of sweet tea in front of me. You okay? She asked, not needing details. I will be, I said, because I hadn't yelled. I hadn't broken. I hadn't let them pull me back into the girl they abandoned. I had stayed Avery, and that was enough. That night, I sat in my studio apartment with Grace the succulent on the windowsill, and the sounds of Pine Hill settling into sleep outside my window. And I started writing. Not in my sketchbook, not for a client, not in blueprints or plans, but a letter to them. Dear Barbara, Ethan, and whoever else still thinks they know me, you came all this way to see me, to talk, to tell me you were proud. What you didn't say was that for years you treated me like a burden, a punchline, a project you could fix by humiliating me. You didn't say you were sorry for what it cost me. You left me in the desert. You walked away and laughed. You let me believe I was alone in the world, and for a while, I was. But Pine Hill gave me something better than forgiveness. It gave me perspective. I'm not sending this letter because I want reconciliation. I'm sending it because I'm finally, truly done. I no longer check over my shoulder. I no longer flinch when a number from Washington pops up on my phone. And most importantly, I no longer crave your validation. I've built something here, a business, a home, a life. You don't get to be part of that. This isn't punishment. It's protection. For me, for the girl you left behind, for the woman she's become. Avery. I printed it, signed it, and mailed it the next morning. No return address, no fanfare. Just an envelope, sealed with truth. And then I went back to work, because life doesn't pause for closure. That afternoon, Daniel walked into my studio unannounced, holding a thin manila folder. I just got off a call, he said, eyes wide, with someone you need to meet. I blinked. Who? A development director from a regional arts foundation. They read the Western groundbreaking article, and they're launching a new pilot program, rebuilding abandoned rural properties into creative co-working spaces. Okay. They want a lead architect. My breath caught. They want you, Avery. 2 weeks later, I was on a train heading toward Flagstaff, where the Foundation's pilot site was located. A long abandoned train station with cracked windows, graffiti-covered walls, and weeds growing through the lobby floor. I saw potential. I saw story. I saw myself. The first meeting felt like a dream. Funders, town leaders, young artists from local collectives. They listened when I spoke, took notes when I described natural light angles and modular workstations. When I mentioned Pine Hill, someone said, "We've heard about what you're doing up there, that library project. Beautiful." And just like that, Pine Hill wasn't just where I landed. It was my launch pad. On the train ride home, I opened my sketchbook and began drafting ideas. Reclaimed steel, skylight panels, a shared courtyard space with mosaic benches made from shattered tile and community-painted bricks. I wasn't just designing a building, I was designing a blueprint for how to heal, how to start again, how to claim space in a world that once tried to push me out. Back in Pine Hill, I returned to a voicemail. This time, not from my family, but from Sam, a community college instructor who ran adult education courses out of the Pine Hill Arts Center. We'd met briefly at a town event. He taught architecture history and had an entire class on adaptive reuse. Kind eyes, gentle voice, a way of speaking that made even crumbling buildings sound poetic. "Hi, Avery," his message began. "This might sound forward, but would you maybe like to grab coffee sometime? No design talk, unless you want to." I smiled. Because life, it seemed, had room for more than just survival now. That night, as I sipped tea on my porch, I whispered aloud to the stars, "I'm not the girl they left in the desert anymore." I wasn't waiting to be rescued. I wasn't looking back. I was moving forward, with hands full of blueprints, a spine made of steel, and a heart open just wide enough for what came next. 5 years after the day they left me in the Arizona desert, I stood at the grand opening of the Flagstaff Creators Hub, the regional co-working and art space I had led from vision to reality. The once abandoned train station was now a vibrant, sun-filled sanctuary of possibility. Brick walls preserved with care, beams restored, floor mosaics designed by kids from surrounding towns. Skylights poured light into every corner. Green space surrounded the rear, where a community garden had just begun sprouting its first tomatoes. Standing beside me was Sam, now my husband. To our left, Clara, Daniel, and June had driven down from Pine Hill to be there for the ribbon cutting. To my right, a group of students from a nearby tribal college I'd partnered with on a scholarship fund we named Second Chances. And somewhere just behind the laughter, applause, and music, I could hear the faint echo of gravel beneath my sandals from 5 years ago. And I smiled, because I had turned that sound of abandonment into the foundation of everything that came next. When the ceremony ended, a reporter approached me. "Ms. Collins," she said, adjusting her mic, "if you could go back and speak to the girl who stood alone at that gas station in the desert, what would you tell her?" I looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "I'd tell her she's not broken. She's just not where she's meant to bloom yet. And I'd tell her to keep walking." Later that evening, Sam and I returned to our home in Pine Hill, a converted firehouse we redesigned together. Upstairs was my studio, downstairs his classroom and reading lounge. In the backyard, our garden was wild and imperfect and full of life. Inside, our daughter, Eliza Grace Collins, 3 years old and a force of nature, was finger-painting galaxies on the kitchen wall. We didn't stop her. The wall was hers to make her own. After we tucked her in, I sat on the porch, wrapped in a soft blanket, sipping tea under the stars. Same desert sky, same quiet, but no longer alone, no longer searching. The next morning, I opened an email that brought everything full circle. Subject: Featured Speaker Invitation, Women in Architecture Summit. It read, "Avery, your work with rural revitalization has been nothing short of groundbreaking. We'd be honored to have you speak at next year's summit in Seattle." Seattle. The city I once dreamed of escaping to. The city that once felt like the peak of my ambition. I smiled. I had surpassed it long ago. I replied simply, "I'd be honored. Let's inspire the next generation to build what others say is impossible." And now I don't just design buildings. I build space for people like me, the ones who were told they were too soft, too emotional, too complicated, the ones who were left behind, only to find out they were meant to leave. Because sometimes being discarded is exactly what frees you. Sometimes being told you're on your own is the first step in realizing you've always had everything you needed inside you. You just had to stop waiting for permission to use it. To those of you who've ever been left behind, by family, by friends, by people who never saw your worth, you are not the joke. You are not the failure. You are not the fragile one. You are the architect of your own becoming. And every step you take forward is already more than they ever expected. So keep walking. Build the life they said you couldn't. And when they finally try to come back, don't open the door. Build a whole new house. Thank you for being part of my story. And wherever you are on your journey, I hope you find your Pine Hill.